How are you, my dear students? Let's start 16.4 Threats to Biodiversity. So first of all, let's talk about biodiversity. What the meaning of biodiversity? Biodiversity means the variety of species, high number of species, high number of individuals, both. So biodiversity is the diverse and wide assortment of species that are found in any ecosystem. So if I told you this ecosystem has high biodiversity, it means that there are many species, many number of plant species, many animal species, many insects, many fishes. In this case, there is biodiversity. And if you go back to the previous lessons, we said that during succession, after time, the number of species will increase. What does it mean? It means that there is increase in biodiversity. As a result, the ecosystem will be more stable. Why should we preserve biodiversity? Why should we take care of the natural areas which have high biodiversity? Because biodiversity is very important, and the loss of biodiversity has long-term effect. What's the effect of biodiversity? Of course, we can get, the human can get food from many types of species. The human can get medicine also. So there are medical and technological advances. So if you lost the biodiversity, or if the environment lost biodiversity, we will lose medical and technological advances. Also, as a result of decrease in biodiversity, we will find there many extinction of species. For example, as a result of decrease in the number of bamboo trees, panda also is endangered, because panda depends on those types of trees. Loss of ecosystems stability. As the biodiversity decreases, also the stability of ecosystems will decrease. That's why we should preserve biodiversity, because the biodiversity is important to the future of biosphere. Biodiversity affects human and all living things. One of the causes of losing biodiversity, or one of the threats for biodiversity, is elimination of habitats of species. One of the causes is urbanization. During urbanization, we build roads. Those roads, they act like barriers to prevent the species from reaching their habitats. Now there is barrier, so this will affect plants, of course, and will affect many types of animals from reaching their habitats on the other side. This is called fragmentation of habitats. So fragmentation of habitats occurs when a barrier forms and prevents an organism from accessing its entire home range. And it occurs when a barrier forms within the habitat. Example, building of roadways, those roads, or the harvesting of forests. When you start to harvest a certain crop, so it's not natural. You will harvest, you will farm it. It's not natural. This also will affect other species, which in turn will affect biodiversity on this ecosystem. So this is the first threat for biodiversity, or to biodiversity. Usually, this habitat fragmentation is caused by human. Sometimes it might be due to natural disaster or accidental, but mostly by human. How can we solve this problem? By forming habitats corridors. Those corridors to help some organisms to pass from this area to the other. This is like a corridor, also in the previous slide here. This also to protect some species by putting an axis of organisms to go back to their homes or habitats. The second thing that might disrupt the stability of ecosystem or that might affect the number of species is introduction of new species. What's an introduced species? Is one that is brought to an ecosystem. Introduced species, new species. And this introduction of species might be accidental or purposeful by human. The human might introduce a certain species, like a certain species of plants, because he knows these plants produce flowers with nice odor or with medical purpose, for medical purposes, or for farming. Or he can also introduce a certain animal for for agricultural reasons or for human benefit. So introduction of new species will affect the native species, and when the introduced species fight or when the introduced species compete with the native species, the introduced species will be invasive species. Invasive species can have an environmental and economical impact. In this case, the introduced species or the invasive species will affect the biodiversity a lot. Why? By affecting the native species. Here is one example. These mice introduced accidental by a certain ship traveled to Australia, and now those house mice, one of the biggest problems in Australia, which cause high cost for farmers. It causes spoiling of many crops, and this is considered like invasive species. It affected other native species like plants. That's why I told you it affected different crops. Another species, kodzo plant. This plant competes with any other plant in this area. So rarely you can find some species that can live in the presence of these plants because they are highly growing plants. They compete with the native species of plants. The human introduced those plants for their broad leaves and nice flowers. So now, what are the threats to biodiversity? Introduction of species and also habitat fragmentation.